Hey yo, ProdCharles here, and as promised, here is the 6th Bendy and the Ink Machine theory compilation that I will be releasing to the channel. This video will help you catch up with all the Bendy theories if you're new, or help you remember things you forgot if you're a veteran prodigy. So get ready to delve into the dark secrets of Joey Drew's cartoon studio that will blow your mind. Remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more cool and interesting horror game theories, and share this with a friend who loves Bendy and needs to know more about the lore. Get ready for the theories in 3, 2, Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey you prodigies, ProdCharles here, and in this video I'll be sharing with you another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory. This one will cover whether Bendy is good or bad. Let's start with what we know. We know that the 3D cartoons have been brought to life because of rituals that Joey Drew performed. We also know that when the cartoons were brought to life, they were experimented on in some way, and it's assumed that this was done by Joey himself. There are messages written across all of the walls in ink, the most notable of which say, "Dreams come true," "Who's laughing now?" "The Creator lied to us," and "He will set us free." And finally, Sammy Lawrence was encased in what he calls
this prison, this inky, dark abyss I call a body.
And when he tries to sacrifice Henry to Bendy, Bendy turns on Sammy instead. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. Looking at the posters around the studio, it is clear that Bendy is the main character of all of the cartoons produced at Joey Drew's cartoon studio. We could assume that Bendy is probably good rather than bad in this sense. So, when Joey performs rituals to bring Bendy into the real world, would Bendy's personality and intentions from the cartoons also carry through? Whether or not it would be true, we know that these rituals were performed on other characters, and from what we've seen from the Boris teaser and the end of Chapter 2, Boris seems to have appeared with a friendly or shy nature. Although the Meatly hasn't currently confirmed Boris's nature, it's safe to say that Boris, or any of the cartoons for that matter, wouldn't be very happy to have their chest cut open or to see their friend's corpse being tampered with. Therefore, I think that there are 3 perspectives to consider here. The first is that Bendy is bad in the perspective of the humans. This is because Bendy actively chases down any human within reach and kills them when the chance arises. The second is that Bendy is actually good and is helping out the cartoons, but is angered because the workers at the studio may not be treating the cartoons with the best of respect. In fact, both of these cases arise from the fact that one of the workers, namely Joey, was tampering with Boris's body at the beginning of Chapter 1. I say one of the workers because although Henry says, "Joey, what were you doing?" we haven't seen any evidence that Joey did this yet. It might not have even been one of the workers at all. That's where the third perspective comes in. The third perspective is that Bendy is bad no matter how you look at it. Whether this happened because that is Bendy's nature in the cartoon, or because something went horribly wrong in the ritual, is still up for interpretation. This is the Game of Thrones perspective, because Bendy wants to see pretty much everyone dead. Just like in the show, the messages around the walls also hint towards these perspectives and almost present themselves like a different story for each one. We start off with dreams come true. The cartoons being brought into the real world, which seems like an impossible feat, has been achieved. A dream has come true. But then we see poor Boris's corpse with the message, "Who's laughing now?" nearby. Who would be laughing? And why? This message almost seems to be mocking Boris. Was it written by a 3D cartoon or a human? This is followed by "The Creator lied to us," which suggests that the happiness of being brought into the 3D world was ruined by the Creator, whom many believe to be Joey Drew. In Chapter 2, we see the messages, "He will set us free," and "It's time to believe," which suggests that whoever is writing these messages is waiting for some kind of savior to rescue them. If we consider Bendy to be evil in the perspective of the humans, then it is possible that it is the humans writing these messages, and the story paints itself as a Frankensteinish message of happiness, followed by disaster. The workers weren't prepared for what they were creating, and instead of becoming masters to their creations, they became the slaves. I have actually considered the possibility of Sammy Lawrence being the one who wrote the messages in another theory, which you can check out by tapping the card that will appear in the top right. While the idea of Bendy helping the cartoons is also possible, the messages seem pretty mixed. In this case, it could still be possible that the humans wrote these messages, but if we try to consider the case of the cartoons writing them, things get pretty confusing. Everything besides "Who's laughing now" suggests that they were all a team. Is it possible that the 3D cartoons were working together, but there was a mutiny? If so, it's quite possible that Bendy became corrupted by power, using it against Boris and who knows who else at some point. Given the third perspective, aka the Game of Thrones perspective, the messages on the walls could have been written by one of the workers or Bendy himself. If it were Bendy, the messages paint a story of happiness, followed quickly by betrayal. Prodigies, all of this hinges on the idea of the messages written in the order that we see them. But it is also possible that they could have been written completely out of the order that I've mentioned. What do you think, and what story do you think these messages tell us? I think that Bendy turning against absolutely everyone looks like the safest option that we have. Take Sammy Lawrence as an example. He gets encased in an inky body and goes out of his way to please Bendy, only to be targeted instead of a fresh plates of dinner that Sammy offers to it. On top of this, Bendy always ends up going after Joey in the end, no matter what happens. It would also explain why Boris is dead in Chapter 1. Bendy didn't choose any favourites and went after anyone he could to maintain power over the cartoon studio and struck Boris down. Boris also appears to be somewhat of a timid character at the end of Chapter 2 and in one of the Bendy and the Ink Machine teasers, which might be because he knows what Bendy and the Searchers are capable of. It's such a shame though. Bendy being betrayed by the humans and becoming the hero of the 3D cartoons makes for a pretty neat story. Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey you Prodigies, ProdCharles here, and in this video I'll be sharing with you another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory. This one will cover the truth behind Boris the Wolf's revival. Let's start with what we know. We know that Boris's corpse can be seen sitting upright in the table in one of the rooms of the upper floors of Joey Drew's studio. We also know that turning the ink machine on causes ink to spurt out of Boris's chest. Ink is one of the main items needed to complete the ritual. And finally, Boris appears in front of Henry at the end of Chapter 2. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. When we first encounter Boris, we can see that he is clearly lifeless with a dissected chest. Judging from the cut, it appears that Boris's internal organs were removed, specifically the heart and lungs, confirming that Boris had definitely died. As a side note, many assume that Joey did this, as when Henry first comes across Boris, he says,
"Oh my god, Joey, what were you doing?"
Though this can't be confirmed unless Henry knew what was going on in the studio in the last 30 years. To fix the ink machine, we need to provide an ink pot, and many have associated ink with blood that provides Boris with a life force. Considering that most of the characters we've encountered so far are inky and would have become that way due to the ritual at the studio, it seems very possible that this is the case, which means that the characters we've come across so far are actually very ugly, bloody messes. Ew. Given that the ink provides a life force for the cartoons, fixing the ink machine and making the ink flow would have caused Boris to come back to life, right? After all, there is a huge ink pipe attached to the back of the table that Boris lies on, connecting to Boris's corpse. Not quite. The Prodigies often give two reasons as for why Boris should be revived due to the ink flow. The first is that the ink starts to flow through Boris's body. This couldn't be so because that very ink flows out of the corpse and probably wouldn't be able to keep Boris conscious. Even if it did, Boris would be stuck on that table, and we clearly see Boris appearing before Henry just fine at the end of Chapter 2. It shouldn't be possible for Boris to be detached from the table and free to move around without a constant supply of ink flow, especially without a heart. The second is that the ink floods the upper floors of the studio. As there would be ink everywhere, Boris should not only have a constant supply of ink to survive off of, but Boris would also be able to move around freely. However, unless the lower floors of the studio also flooded, there's no way that the upper floors could flood. This is because we clearly see Henry fall through a huge hole in the floor before the end of Chapter 2. And we know that the music department doesn't flood to the ceiling. Even if it did flood somehow, we have to consider that Boris appears at the end of Chapter 2 perfectly fine, with no scars to the chest. Some Prodigies have said that Boris might be wearing bandages, but I think that these lines just belong to Boris's overalls, and even if they were bandages, they do not cover the chest well enough to help with healing. Besides, when Bendy jumpscares Henry in Chapter 1, a roller door closes tightly, preventing any ink from the ink machine to flow towards Boris's room. In the past, we've said that Bendy might have revived Boris by sacrificing Sammy instead of Henry, but this relies on the worker transformation theory being true. What do you think? I think that there's one more interesting case to consider. What if the Boris we see at the end of Chapter 2 is actually a worker at the studio in a suit? The worker may be using a suit to be able to travel around the studio safely, posing as a cartoon. But who could it be? Given the Boris teaser we've seen from the Meatly games, Boris looks like a timid character who wields a wrench. Who else who works at the studio would be cowardly and wield a wrench? Perhaps the only one to say in every single recording so far that they'd be out of here? You know, the only one who would have business holding a wrench because as the janitor, maintenance is part of their duties. We've all seen the ink machine plans in Sammy Lawrence's office after all. That's right, the worker is none other than Wally Franks. Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey you prodigies, ProdCharles here, and in this video I'll be sharing with you a Bendy and the Ink Machine conspiracy theory. This one will explain which side Alice Angel will be on. Prodigies, please pay careful attention to this theory and watch it all the way through, because it's going to blow your mind. Let's start with what we know. We know that there are messages on the walls of Joey Drew's cartoon studio, such as "Dreams come true" and "The creator lied to us." We also know that Susie Campbell is the voiceover artist for Alice Angel, and Susie holds Joey Drew in high regards. Susie Campbell mentions that the word around the studio was that Alice Angel could be as popular as Bendy someday. And finally, Sammy Lawrence, music director at the studio, saw Bendy as almost a holy being. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. Before we fully understand which side Alice Angel will take, we must first understand a few things from the beginning of Bendy and the Ink Machine. We are all familiar with Joey Drew being the head of the cartoon studio that Henry returns to after 30 years of quitting. As part of Henry's adventure, we find out that Joey Drew might actually be a little bit crazy. Wally Franks, the janitor at the studio, reported that Joey Drew asked all the workers to donate an item from their desks to appease the gods. In Wally's recording, he mentions that he thinks Joey lost his mind and says,
"But hey, he writes the checks,"
which suggests that the workers pretty much only respect Joey for being their boss and giving them money. Kind of like Squidward's relationship with Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob. Come to think of it, Squidward sometimes thinks that SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are a bit loopy too. Well, anyway, this is brought up again by another worker, Norman Polk, who mentions in Chapter 2 that Joey Drew has his peculiarities, and Sammy Lawrence makes it pretty obvious that he's annoyed by Joey's decision to build a system of ink pipes at the studio. There is one exception though. Susie Campbell. Susie Campbell's audio recording gives us some vital information about Joey Drew, as well as herself. She mentions that she started working with Joey Drew 2 months before she made the recording, and her work involved voicing various characters, ranging from talking chairs to dancing chickens. Whether Alice voiced these characters with Joey Drew's studio is unclear, as voice actors could have gigs with various studios, but she makes it quite clear that she voices Alice Angel and feels a connection with her. If you are a veteran prodigy, you will be familiar with a theory that we came up with that gives evidence showing that Susie Campbell may be Alice Angel. Even if this theory isn't true, this line is spoken with such passion and timing that suggests that Alice and Susie are alike, similar to how Pokemon and humans can build a synchronized relationship in the Pokemon series. They have a connection, almost as if they know each other, and since voice actors tend to need a strong feeling of understanding for their character, much like any actor really, before they're able to play them, it does make sense that this would be the case. It also seems that she has a connection with Joey Drew. Her recording means that even though she was only working there for 2 months, she was going to love working under Joey Drew. This gives us some incredibly important information. Susie Campbell not only wanted to make a good impression on Joey Drew, as she was a new worker, but she also liked Joey Drew and the others at the studio. She was the odd one out because her work life was a blessing in comparison to her fellow workers. Susie was completely oblivious to Joey and Sammy's crazy ways because all she saw was her future success. This leads me to believe that Alice Angel would be indebted to Joey Drew and would actually be on his side. If Susie Campbell is truly grateful to be working with Joey Drew and for him to be allowing her to find a character that she truly loves to voice, one that would be so popular that it would make her a star, it makes sense that the one cartoon who would truly share a connection with her would understand this and follow suit, especially since Joey Drew would have given her life. However, we need to consider that 30 years had passed at the studio, and we can't be sure exactly when Joey Drew's rituals were performed and the effect that they had on the workers. Well, Other than Sammy for now, we also need to consider how the workers' perspectives may have changed as a result. Yes, Alice Angel may have been devoted and loyal to Joey Drew Senpai at first, but remember the message the creator lied to us. Someone suffered at that studio. And it doesn't matter whether they were human or cartoon. This is because we also need to consider how the rituals also changed the minds of the workers. Sammy, once annoyed out of his mind with Joey Drew's ways, suddenly became a devoted follower of Bendy. So it's possible that the other workers, such as Norman Polk, shared the same switch in mentality. As a result, Susie Campbell, the one worker to share an honest connection with their work and enjoy working with Joey Drew, would have turned against him after he betrayed his creations. After all, the creator lied to them. What do you think? I think that there are other pretty cool points to consider. For example, if Joey Drew really is Bendy, then Bendy and Alice's rivalry would also be a clue pointing towards this theory being true. We can also look to the message written in Boris's room, "Who's laughing now?" as a way of Alice mockingly eliminating any potential competition. Dreams Come True would refer to Susie's only character who she shared a true connection with in the animation world coming to life. Remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more interesting horror game theories and secrets. If you love horror game theories, be sure to check the description for a link to all of the theories and secrets and prodigies. I really hope that these theories help you to expand on how you think, so it can help you with your thinking in your daily lives. See ya! Prodigies, I realize that Bendy and the Ink Machine is only in its early stages, and many things will probably change from now until the final version, especially since Chapter 3 is just around the corner and the release date trailer is going to drop in no time. I only made this theory because a lot of the Prodigies really wanted a deeper analysis of Alice Angel, and I'm sure Chapter 3 will give us even more information that will make Alice's character even more interesting than what I've said in this theory. That goes for Susie Campbell too, so let's look forward to that. Chapter 3 hype! Remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more cool and interesting horror game theories.